Hi, this is Dave. Welcome to another episode of Dr. Dave's Diversions. In this episode, we're going to look at this curious Ethernet NIC, network interface card or controller, for the Macintosh Plus. And we'll see if I have the luck of the Irish and can get this working with my Mac Plus emulator on the Amiga, so I can stop using these and Sneakernet to get software from the internet to that machine. Stick around. So what this device is, it's the Asante EN/SC for Ethernet/SCSI, an Ethernet NIC that attaches to a SCSI bus instead of another sort of internal bus in a machine. And why is that? That's because the Macintosh Plus doesn't have an external expansion port. So they used the SCSI bus to attach this Ethernet NIC. So is there a connection between the Ethernet and the Mac? Well, there is a curious one. Both the GUI, the Macintosh that supposedly Steve Jobs and Apple were convinced by Xerox PARC, seeing the machine called the Alto here, convinced them to do the GUI interface on the Mac. What the Alto also had was Ethernet, network connectivity. And Ethernet was developed by Bob Metcalfe when he was working at Xerox PARC in the mid-70s. And Bob was familiar with AlohaNet, the radio-based communications network in Hawaii, and modeled Ethernet in part based on AlohaNet, but built it using cabling. So the folks from Apple and Steve Jobs had seen the Alto, both with its graphical environment and the power of network connectivity for workstations, but didn't adopt both of them, only the GUI. And why is that? Well, in the early 80s, the Ethernet was quite expensive. It would cost you hundreds or thousands of dollars to connect a machine to an Ethernet network. Yeah. And the Macintosh was already expensive. So what they settled for was AppleTalk over a proprietary bus that did something like 260 kbits per second instead. And I used that, when I was introduced to Macs in the late 80s and early 90s, and that worked pretty well, but it's only a fraction of the speed of Ethernet. So then for a machine like a Mac Plus that only had a SCSI bus connection, usually used for hard drives or connections to printers or such, or scanners, how could it connect to Ethernet? Well, the company Asante, which was an early mover in twisted pair Ethernet, they developed this device. And this one here is actually hollowed out. I actually have the contents of it over there on the bench, and I'll show you that in a little bit, trying to troubleshoot what problems I was having with this particular device. But the cool thing they did here is developed a device that could attach to a twisted pair Ethernet using telephone wiring, or the earlier standards, which was ThinNet 10-base-2 and ThickNet 10-base-5, using an attachment unit interface or an AUI connector. And this particular first model of the ENSC could do all of those things. So it's a pretty cool device to have for a Mac Plus. You loaded up this on a Ethernet driver, and you had Ethernet connectivity from a Mac that previous to it had no such ability to connect to those things. I see these devices are going for premium if you can find them online now, and some for quite ridiculous prices. And I happened to pick this one up in a junk box, decades ago, in the hallway at the university where I worked, and was optimistic that it could save me from Sneakernet. Let me tell you what I'm doing today to get software to that Mac Plus emulator. What I'm doing is using my modern MacBook Pro, downloading the piece of software, then SCPing it to a website that I can reach via HTTP using my old Dell Linux machine that has a 3.5-inch PC compatible floppy in it. Because it's running old software, I can't connect to modern SSL websites, so I fetch the thing down to the Dell Linux machine. I write it to a 720K floppy disk, which my Amiga can read when it's booted as an Amiga. I write it down to the Amiga hard drive, then I boot Emacs, And then I run a transfer utility under Emacs that can see the Amiga hard drive and read it off there and write it to a Macintosh disk. And then I can run stuff at Expander or whatever and expand it. So a lot of work and something I'd like to avoid. So I'm wondering if I'm lucky enough that I can get my Amiga on an Ethernet and on the internet for the first time via the Emacs emulator. And that's what we'll explore today. So to get the device connected to the Amiga, I needed a set of SCSI cables. I had lots of those because I had a lot of SCSI devices. I put some quite long ones on there and have the card connected right now in series with the other SCSI devices and terminated appropriately. Let's take a look at what the device looks like when it's connected that way and what we see happen on the Amiga. My two strategies are see if the SCSI bus is working correctly with the ENSC on it when I'm in the Amiga. The Amiga doesn't know how to use that device, but it should at least be able to coexist with the other SCSI devices, and then go into the Mac and use things like MacEnv, which also shows the SCSI devices, and load the drivers and stuff there. So that's what we're going to do. So here we are at the bench with the Asante EN SC Ethernet over SCSI device. And I have it powered up right now, and I have it connected to the back of the SCSI connector on my ICD add SCSI on my Amiga. We do not have it connected to Twisted Pair Ethernet right now. We've got the SCSI ID set to 3, and here's the power here. And then this cable out, it's two identical SCSI cables. This one going out goes to my SiQuest 105 drive with the terminator after it, and the termination, or the LEDs on the terminator, so I think that's connected correctly. So basically what we've got is this recommended configuration from the Asante manual. Instead of the Mac, there's my Amiga. We have this 25-pin D connector SCSI cable. I've got quite a long one so that I can get it down here to the bench. Connected on there, and then going out of there, we don't have this drive, but here we have a SiQuest SCSI drive, and the termination is on there. So recommended configuration. Some pretty curious documentation in the manual for the Asante ENSC. It basically says, and it's this one right here, it says you can't have it as the only device. You can't have it as the last device in the chain. If you have it as the first device in the chain or the middle device in the chain, then it's got a square, which means termination required on last SCSI device. So I think we're good. I'm not seeing any communication problems when the device isn't on the SCSI bus, but I am seeing some when it is on the bus. So let's take a look at exactly what those issues are. And I've got a couple ways programmatically or with software to analyze what's going on the SCSI bus. One is under the Amiga, we can run the utility sysinfo. So in the drives menu on sysinfo, there's a SCSI choice that kind of pulls the SCSI bus. So you're seeing a bunch of drives that the Amiga mounted here. But if we say SCSI, it kind of looks at what's going on there. So the first thing we see is because ID 0 doesn't have anything. 1 and 2 are both code source, the SCSI test D device. That's correct. Those are the two SCSI devices I have configured on the SCSI test D. Now ID 3, which is what we said we set here, should be this device. And you can see that the polling of the SCSI bus blocks when it gets to that. That's the problem I'm seeing. And then it times out or something and continues through the rest of the possible, well, here's 7 devices out of the 8 possible SCSI IDs. So now I'm going to actually power down the Amiga and see if we can get that SiQuest to appear again. All right, so now we're powering up. We have the SiQuest 105 hard drive on the chain past the NSC on now. All right, so that's what we would expect, right? Now we see the two SCSI IDs 1 and 2, which are the SCSI 2SD. We don't see device 3 because that's the Asante here. It's off. And we see the SyQuest SQ3105S at ID number 4. So I think what's in order is to try changing this SCSI ID and see what effect it has. We've got 5 and 6 to try, so let's try one of those. So this device is off right now. Got it set to 5 there. So now let's, and I'm gonna power down the Amiga again, and we'll put power back to the Asante and turn it on again and see what happens. So the Asante has power. You can see it has power. It's weirdly, this always seems to show the traffic light green and solid. This LI is link integrity, which seems to be sort of whether or not you have link, although that flashes, but the documentation says that's okay. All right, so we've got the SCSI ID set to 5, and we're gonna power back up here. So one of the things I'm noticing when the Asante is on the SCSI bus, it seems to boot a little slower. It pauses. So I definitely think something's wrong there. Okay, so this is a weird problem, right? So now we have this clearly pointing to SCSI ID 5, but it's interfering with the Amiga's communication with SCSI ID 2, which is one of the SCSI 2SD units. So what seems really weird is it's almost like the SCSI ID selector number is not working. See now it's set to 5. We can see device 4, the SyQuest, past it. So the connectivity on these cables looks good. It's just, it seems like the Asante interferes with some other SCSI IDs. So let's do the same thing again. This time we'll change it to SCSI ID, I guess 6 is the only other choice, right? Weirdly, this has 7, 8, 9. It goes 0 to 9. Of course, you can't have devices above 0 to 7 on a SCSI bus, so they just used some stock part that was decimal, 10 digits. All right, so let's get out of here. Power down. Try that one last drive number and see what happens then, or SCSI ID number. So you can see here, I've changed this to point to 6. That's on again. Let's boot the Amiga. So again, it's taking longer than it usually would to boot, suggesting that somehow the Asante is causing the communications on the SCSI bus to change. Okay, so now it seems like it's interfering with SCSI ID 1. So it's set to 6, but somehow it's interfering with SCSI ID 1. Super weird, right? All right, we'll power down again because we can't see the boot disk, which is SCSI ID 1. I'm gonna shut this off. For the heck of it, I'm gonna change it to 7. I honestly don't remember what the SCSI ID is of my ICD add SCSI card. I don't know if it's 0 or 7. Still doing this thing where it's taking longer to boot than if this device were not turned on. Booting, so SCSI ID 1 access must be working fine. I'm really curious to see what it says here. And now we're looking at the SCSI bus. Now it's blocking, looking like it's trying to access ID 1. Or checking SCSI ID 0 is blocking. All right, so it did seem to sort of time out. And then it says these other devices are here. Now that may make sense, right? Because a device like this, it wouldn't support this HD SCSI command possibly, especially if that means drives, because it's not a storage device. So so that looks, we've got the device on, we can see all the other drives. Let's see what it looks like in AMAX. So here, SCSI device 4, the SyQuest drive is this AX3. And I've got System 608 on there. That's, you know, spinning Rust. It's a 50 meg SideQuest drive. So, and then it says check for SCSI Manager partitions. That's some AMAX feature to mount foreign kinds of, or Macintosh drives directly. So we'll leave that. In this version of 608, we have the drivers for the Asante already installed. So you'll see that pop up in the lower left. There it is. The NSC software starting. It says question mark regarding the network connectivity. But there's a tool that came with the Asante to do troubleshooting. Let's give that a look. The troubleshooter 1.6.3. Oh, sure. Great. Okay, now it just locked up. The mouse doesn't move. Interesting. Yeah, that just crashed or something. Seeing some weirdness. Whenever the ENSC is powered on, it's with different SCSI IDs. It seems to interfere with other devices with different SCSI IDs. So let's open this up and see if there's work on the assumption that there's some primitive thing just having to do with its own identification on the SCSI bus that's wrong. And you know, when it's plugged in, other devices seem to be able to talk through it, so I don't think it's a SCSI bus connectivity problem. Looks like the device just has 2 Phillips screws there. Oh, I see. We got these guys too. This AUI looks like it's not going to come out with that in there. So I guess we're going to have to take this off too. The attachment unit interface plugs have a kind of a funny or unusual way of, you know, you put another connector on there and slide it over. So let's let that has to come off. I see some screws on the other side. I think there's a panel underneath here that's got to come unscrewed. I wonder if that's just a decal on there. That would be nasty. Yeah, it seems like this might be a decal right there. And then I can see way down in there, there are some screws that thread into the opposite side of where this is. I guess let's heat this up, see if we can get this decal off. The reason why I think it's a decal is I see it's been damaged a little bit by the connector edge pushing against it. Yeah, there's a couple of screws there. Well, it's a little hard to get at, but I guess we're lucky it's serviceable. All right, let's see what do we have here. So lots and lots of stuff. There's a fuse right there. I wonder where I should start with this. All right, so there's definitely this switch right here. Man, how do you read that thing? Oh, it's right at the bottom there. So I guess I could use a meter and test for continuity in the different positions and see if that's working correctly. It's kind of sealed up. I was wondering if I could just put some contact cleaner in there, but it's hard to believe that a switch like that would have that sort of a problem. It really does seem, though, like it collides with a number that's near to this number. Don't see anything weird about those caps. There's not too many of them, though. I mean, imagine this was at the university. This thing must have been on continually for years and years. There's a disc right there. I'm going to play around a little bit with this and see if I can decode how this this switch works. Well, I guess I should have also said that some of these ceramic caps look all cruddy. And then there's another ceramic over here that has similar, discoloration on its outside. So here's where we're at, or where I'm at with this Asante EN. After talking collecting some advice from Joe at Joe's Computer Museum and Mark at TheRetroChannel, just because I was confused about what some of the components are, what diagnostic steps to take next, is they taught me that this is this device is not a capacitor, so it doesn't really matter that it looks all grungy and stuff. It's just an inductor, and Mark said those almost never go bad, and sure enough, I tested it, and it's got good low resistance across it, so I put that back in place. What we have is that the device constantly has its traffic light on, which is this green one here, and I was first optimistic that that was just some normal mode that this was in, but after seeing some pictures of this thing in operation online, I see that when it's quiet, it should not have the traffic light on, as you would expect. So Joe suggested that means probably one of the chips is bad and it's stuck in some state. I tested out, there's this rotary switch. It was pretty easy with a continuity test to decode how that thing passes complementary binary number to the board. That's in working order, so I have no explanation for why this device, when it's on the SCSI bus, interferes with SCSI devices having other IDs differently depending on what that's set to. Again, points to possibly a problem with either a logic chip or some other IC on here. Other things I checked, voltages on it, of course, so I think the power section is working fine. There is a 5 volt to 9 volt converter over here, and at first I checked that and I was getting no power out of it, but with some more experimentation I realized that you have to have it set in the thin net setting for that particular 9 volt apparently power supply to be required. So when it's in that position, that checks out fine. So anyway, Mark suggested running it for at least 10 minutes and feeling the chips to see if any of them were warm, suggesting they might be bad. And unfortunately, I did find that one of the Asante chips does feel warm, about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, about 20 degrees warmer than the other chips. And so that's a possibility that may be wrong. Of course, because it's a custom chip, I can't replace that unless I have another one of these. So Joe said, maybe it's a PAL or a GAL or something that could be, or a ROM that could be reproduced if we had another one, but I need to find another one. So it looks like this is a dead end, and I'm stuck with Sneakernet. I can't get this working. It's showing the same problems and failure modes now as it was before I started looking at it. So we will move on. So as you can see, we didn't win this one. This was a frustrating segment of my MARCHintosh project, but we had many other parts to go. Yeah. Maybe this source server can help us out, and in one of the upcoming weeks we'll look at the early Mac games that I have. On my mother's side, I'm Irish, and on my father's side, I'm Polish. So that didn't pull me through with the lucky Irish, but I hope you have a good St. Patrick's Day if you observe that, and enjoy MARCHintosh. I'll see you next time.